Hi, my name is Latanya Campbell, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'd like to take a moment to thank Serenity Perkins and the Girl Scouts for this wonderful opportunity to do the Meet the Expert with you all. In preparation for this meeting, I did jot down some questions that I thought you would be most interested in. But if you have questions that come up later or you would like to discuss something further, please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. I do want to put on a disclaimer. I am going to be talking about domestic violence as well as race-based trauma. Both can be triggering, so I just want you to take care of yourself. So who is Latanya? Well, I am a mother, an employee, a supervisor, founder, and student. I would consider myself a community advocate if I had to pick a title at all. I love to elevate the voice of others, in particular those who some would consider an underdog. My purpose is to inspire, empower, and motivate individuals to live their best lives. I wear several hats in the community. I am a leader, I am an advocate, and I'm also an educator. I work at the Women's Community, which is a domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking center. Specifically, I supervise the Transitional Living Program. So how did I start? Well, I started out as a TLP advocate, and then I transitioned to the legal advocacy role, after which I was promoted to supervision. So I began supervising the Transitional Living Program as well as the legal advocacy position. We since have made the legal advocacy position into a full program called our social justice program. And so now I'm actually supervising the transitional living program as well as the abuse and later life programs. So the transitional living program is designed to provide long-term supportive services to victims impacted by intimate partner violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. Now, intimate partner violence, it can be physical violence, emotional or mental abuse, financial abuse, or sexual abuse. Our goal is to help victims to be safe, stable, and self-sufficient. We do this by listening, safety planning, supporting, and elevating the voices of the people that we serve. Um, we also do this by helping them overcome any barriers that they have to being stable and self-sufficient, such as getting them connected to community resources for childcare, medical assistance, food share, Wills to Work program, or job training programs. Now, there are a lot of things that come into play when you're severing a relationship, especially if that relationship was unhealthy and there was a difference in power and control dynamics. So, to combat some of these obstacles, we may need to refer clients to mental health professionals, Judicare, which provides free legal advice and representations if you're qualified. We might have to help them with finding a new place to live. In fact, domestic violence is a precursor to homelessness. So our program allows us to help clients find safe and affordable places to live. And it also helps clients with some money to be able to get into a place. Our abuse and later life program, it does the same thing as a transitional living program, but it's for a population of 50 or older. So some additional things about the women's community. All of our advocates are cross-trained on providing domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking services. We're also all trained in being able to do navigate through the civil and criminal court system. So whether that's helping with a restraining order or divorce paperwork or attending court for something that was actually reported to the police. We also have a 24-hour crisis line, emergency shelter, and we respond on call to the emergency room and police department when we're called. Additionally, we have specialized programs for the Latinx population and the Hmong population. We have dedicated bilingual, bicultural advocates to respond to their needs. It is important to note that we do provide services to all victims of abuse, regardless of gender identity, sexual orientation, obviously race, religion, and ability. A lot of people think because our name is the women's community that we don't provide services to men, and that is incorrect. In fact, we do. If they do need emergency shelter, they can also stay in our emergency shelter if it's needed. One of the major issues. So the biggest issues for the population that we serve is safety. Many people question why victims of abuse don't just leave a situation. In reality, that is the most dangerous time for victims to be killed. In fact, I believe in the last couple of months here in Marathon County alone, we've already had a couple of different domestic violence related homicides. People say, oh, just get a restraining order. Well, a restraining order is a piece of paper. If a person is violent, that piece of paper does not stop them from being violent. The next major issue for victims is financial support for themselves and or their children if they have them. They might not have worked previously, or they don't have enough income to be able to maintain the expenses for themselves and their children if they have them. Again, research shows that domestic violence is a precursor to homelessness as well as food insecurity. And additionally, um, when a victim severs a relationship, that their children may have to still go with the person that was hurting them. And so sometimes the victim feels that it's safer for the kids um, if they're there, if they're around to be able to mitigate that situation. So what do you need to know to do this work? Well, honestly, you don't know what you don't know until you learn it. And you never know everything, and everyone's situation is different. So trauma is complex, and most victims have childhood trauma on top of their current situation. The biggest lesson that I learned was simply just to listen, to be present with the client and not try to fix their situation. I'm a fix it type of person. I like to jump right in and see what it is that I can do to make your situation better. And honestly, when working with trauma victims, the biggest thing you can do is listen. So we all are trained in the dynamics of domestic violence, trauma-informed care, mindfulness, restraining order, sexual assault response, strangulation, stalking, and the interrelationship of violence and substance abuse. We've all had suicide training, lethality assessment training. We've had training on inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, and human trafficking. And we're constantly trying to learn new best practices and being able to provide support. So, what does a typical day look like? A typical day is having a plan and then throwing that plan out the window. In the realm of crisis work, you have to be flexible. Plan days may not look like you have them in your planner. You might not never do anything that you actually scheduled yourself to do because something arose. Um, let's see here. I might have an agency meeting with our leadership or several different community meetings that I might not be able to go to because there was an emergency at the shelter. When we do have some downtime, we do have to enter data in our system, respond to emails, phone calls, work on grants and reports. So, what is the environment like? Well, it's a beautiful chaos. We are a family. We know when someone's happy or when someone is crabby, when someone needs a hug or a laugh. All of our services are confidential, and we cannot discuss anything outside of the agency about a particular client. And we hear some of the most horrific things that humans can do to one another. We only have each other to lean on, and that's what we do. We actually lean on each other. Um, let's see here, what other type of questions you might have. Um, Recommendations, right? So most people in human service industry have experienced some trauma in their lifetime. I recommend seeing a clinician to process through that trauma. If nothing else, get a safety plan together if you are triggered by someone else's circumstances. Additionally, if you cannot use your voice for the betterment of others, advocacy probably is not for you. Advocacy is about empowering and lifting the voices of others. So some additional things that I do, because the women's community is, like I said, one of the roles that I play in. I also have my own diet. Well, actually, before I jump to that, in the women's community, I am able to do some anti-oppression work as well. That's part of our mission. So I am on the Marathon County Diversity Affairs Commission. I'm also on the City of Wausau's Freedom and Liberation Committee and United Way's uh, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. So, in my role on all of these three different platforms, what I'm doing is elevating the voice of marginalized populations. I'm including them in the conversations. I am discussing and centering what their needs are in these committees to make sure that other people are aware of these things. For instance, affordable housing looks different to someone who identifies in the majority population versus someone who identifies in a minority population. So I'll discuss what their housing needs and what their housing experiences have been in this community. When we get to talking about systemic oppression, when it comes to health inequities, incarceration, school suspension, when we're talking about infant mortality rate. So I bring all of these things up in these meetings to see how we can work together as a community for the betterment of the people that we serve. We want everyone to feel welcomed, embraced, and accepted in this community. I'm always striving for people to accept people for how and who they are, not for how or who we want them to be. Meaning, people aren't expected to assimilate, but to be who they are. So that's something else that I do in the community. Right now, I've been working on a resolution trying to get passed on the county level called A Community for All. It has created a lot of opposition and it's I would say it's been divisive. The intent of the resolution was not to be divisive, but for whatever reason, it has been similar to that of the mask mandate that was meant to keep people safe, and for whatever reason, it turned to be a political issue that was creating division in our community. So again, that's some things that I do with the Liberation and Freedom Committee. We just worked on a conversion ban for LGBTQ folks. Some people were still doing conversion therapy, which is detrimental to the mental, physical well-being of folks who identify in those communities. So we helped get a ban on it, a resolution passed through the city. In addition to the women's community and the work that I do for victims and marginalized populations, I also own my own diversity consulting business. It's called Lprc Diversity Consulting Services. So I founded this position, excuse me, I founded this business last year in July. It was after the murder of George Floyd. I found myself being, and I've shared this before, I found myself being paralyzed. I didn't want to leave my home. I didn't want to go to the store or go for a walk. And then I heard one of our community leaders, in fact, our police chief, he had condemned, the violence that was inflicted upon George Floyd. And that gave me the courage I needed to come out of my home. Once I did, I started thinking about what could I do more to try to mitigate some of the adversities that people of color and people who identify historically in marginalized populations face. Now, in my role at the women's community, like I said, I do a lot of things with helping people overcome any barriers that they have to self-sufficiency. Well, I noticed there is a differential in treatment for folks who identify as Hmong, Latinx, African American, and also the LGBTQ community when trying to find housing, when trying to find employment, when trying to find get adequate health benefits and services. And so I started using my voice to elevate those populations so that they cannot, so that we can increase their quality of life and mental health well-being, which means bringing awareness around the issues that they're facing and challenge people to increase their knowledge on systemic oppression, on implicit biases, and racism in general so that they can do better. I'm a firm believer if you know better, you can do better. So I created LPRC Diversity Consulting Services in my role as the founder of that particular business. I educate different organizations and agencies on what racism means, what it looks like, how systemic oppression throughout these years still impact the lives of marginalized populations. So that historical trauma piece mixed with what current day situations that they have, how national headlines, trickle down into smaller communities like ours. So I do presentations on that. I've also, and I start from a place of strength, right? So a lot of and everyone has a strength and everyone has opportunities for growth. So I try to tap into what that organization's strengths are already, so that I can create change and growth using those particular strengths. Um, so sometimes, I do it individually for organizations. Sometimes I just do overall presentations on what respectability politics is, why I don't see color is, detrimental to people of color, and particularly Black people. I also created what I called courageous community conversations, and I did that for Black History Month. What I did is I had, over a course of 4 weeks, I had three different educational presentations. So, a lot of times people say that slavery ended, 400 years ago. Well, I kind of go around that and talk about what life has been like after the transatlantic slave trade. I talked about, race-based trauma and how that impacts people's mental and physical health, and actually the longevity of their life, from experiencing everyday racism and microaggressions and overt hatred. So we had a presentation on that, and then we also had one on why are we still talking about racism? Why are we still talking about, why are we still having these discussions, and what that means for us, and what we can do to support marginalized communities. And then lastly, I had what Black women's panel. So just discussing some of our experiences locally in this community, and how it impacted us professionally and personally, how it impacted our children's lives, and how we kind of navigate through this society as being a Black woman, and the intersections of that, and how we have to, um, what we have to do to be able to survive, day to day and adapt to our environments. So I did that for Black History Month. I'm in the process right now of creating a Juneteenth event. So if you're not aware, Juneteenth signifies the day 2 years after Abraham Lincoln did the Emancipation Proclamation, where he freed slaves. Not all slaves were free. In fact, it wasn't until 2 years later, when the last people who were enslaved were notified that in fact that they were free. So that's what Juneteenth signifies. It's a day of freedom and liberation, for all people that were Black and were enslaved during that time period. So we will have partnered with Rise Up, which is a local art community that do some type of mural and painting and artwork with the children. We have an obstacle course, bouncy house. The police and fire chief will be there with their trucks and cars and dogs for the children to interact with. We will have a crowning of king and queen, just to bring awareness and show our support and love for one another. We will also have what we call an open mic. So people can dance, they can sing, they can do spoken word or poetry, or any way that they want to express themselves in regards to freedom, as well as challenges marginalized populations face. We will also be shedding light on Pride Month too. So we'll have some things just to bring additional awareness for Pride. For work, I'm actually also doing, it's Elder Abuse Awareness Week, so we'll be shedding some light on the abuse that the elder population face, which still includes, people don't know, but it does include financial abuse, sexual abuse, physical, mental, and emotional. So I kind of do a lot of different things in my role. Here in the community. So both with my business and at my job. I'm also a student, I told you. So I'm in grad school at Capella University. I am obtaining my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. I'm excited. I have 1.5 weeks left of coursework. Then I'll start my field work in July, and that's for my practicum and my internship. So, March of next year, I should be complete with that. But then I'll have to start my 3,000 clinical hours, so that I can be a licensed clinical mental health professional. What I want to do after. So, I told you guys you're never done learning, you're never done growing, right? So I'm constantly learning, and I realized I didn't know as much about my history, Black history, or history as a woman, until I started doing that research and digging for myself. I didn't learn most of the things in high school or even in my bachelor's or master's program. I had to do a lot of research for myself. So I definitely encourage you to do so. But what I want to do once I'm finished with my master's is I want to open up a program for at-risk youth. So youth who have experienced neglect, physical or sexual abuse, one of their parents were incarcerated or passed away or had mental health conditions. Um, Youth that lived in poverty, experienced, different opposition or oppression in their lifetime. I want to help them mitigate, their experiences. So process through that trauma, but I also want to help them to get the skill that they need to be able to um, process through that trauma healthily. So we know that sometimes when people have been had negative experiences, they will be drinking, smoking cigarettes, doing drugs, having unhealthy relationships. Domestic violence or intimate partner violence is definitely prevalent in the teen population too. Um, but also having unprotected sex or having sex with frequent partners, suicide, all the different things that we can self harm. I want to give them the tools that they need to be able to process through those experiences that they had in a positive light and try to overcome that trauma. But at the same time, giving them hope, for their future and tapping into the strength and resilience that they already have to make their outcomes of their lives, better. So I'm going to do this in three parts, counseling and mentorship and life skills. So I want to open up my own program to be able to work with youth to, like I said, tap into their resilience that they already have. This is a lot of information I kind of gave you in a short period of time. Again, feel free to give me a call or email me if you have additional questions or you want to talk about something further. I would love to talk to a group of individuals, not so much the video recording myself. So, you guys have a great day. Talk to you soon. Hopefully. Bye bye.